Hello again. Now, today I want to talk about audiobooks, the favourite subject of mine. I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm in the taxi and when I'm at home. I'm fed up with the radio, especially lately with all the depressing news that you hear. It's a bit tedious and boring, so I turn it off and listen to audiobooks. And I've got an account with an Amazon company. I've forgotten the name of them. Anyway, I've got an account, gets me one book a month. And one book a month is never enough. I generally tend to go for the longer books. If a book is only like 7 or 8 hours long, I only get one credit a month, so I tend not to waste a credit on a short book like that. But even then, I'm usually finished listening to the book before the next credit is due. And I went to look for another source of audiobooks. There's a website called LibriVox. And what they do is upload, I think it's their mission to upload every book that's out copyright. So they're all copyright free books. And you can download and listen to them free of charge as much as you want, which is great. Now, I remember some years ago when I was doing higher English, I heard about this book that was written sometime around 1800 or 1820 by a guy named James Hogg, The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. And I think it was one of the first sort of horror stories or to be put into a novel. It's a really complex book, really archaic Scotch language, and I found it on LibriVox. Now, the LibriVox books are all read by volunteers, and the guy that's doing the reading of this particular book has got a very strong Southern American accent, and I thought, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. Because of it's a very, very Scottish book. But it turned out that he didn't attempt to do the fake Scottish accent, which was great. But I haven't listened to it all. I've just listened to the first couple of chapters. I downloaded the professional reading from Audible. That was the name I was trying to remember. I downloaded the professional reading from Audible last month, and it was brilliant. So I was interested to see how this American guy was going to read it. And so far, I've been quite impressed. He hasn't tried to do the fake Scottish accent, which would have been disastrous, but in the second half of the book, there's a lot more dialogue. So I'll be interested to hear how he copes with that. So, just give me a second and I'll be back. I'll see what I'm doing.
Battery 5. Connected to Pixel 4. Engine Rob.
Section 1. The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. Written by himself by James Hogg. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The editor's narrative. It appears from tradition, as well as some parish registers still extant, that the lands of Dal Castle, or Dalchastle, as it is often spelled, were possessed by a family of the name of Colwyn about 150 years ago, and for at least a century previous to that period. That family was supposed to have been a branch of the ancient family of Colquhoun, and that it is certain that from it spring the Cohens that spread towards the border. I find that, in the year 1687, George Colwyn succeeded his uncle of the same name in the lands of Dal Castle and Belgrannon. And, this being all I can gather of the family from history, to tradition I must appeal for the remainder of the motley adventures of that house. But, of the matter furnished by the latter of these powerful monitors, I have no reason to complain. It has been handed down to the world in unlimited abundance, and I am certain that, in recording the hideous events which follow, I am only relating to the greater part of the inhabitants of at least 4 counties of Scotland, matters of which they were before perfectly well informed. This George was a rich man, or supposed to be so, and was married, when considerably advanced in life, to the sole heiress and reputed daughter of a Baillie Ord of Glasgow. This proved a conjunction anything but agreeable to the parties contracting. It is well known that the Reformation principles had long before that time taken a powerful hold of the hearts and affections of the people of Scotland, although the feeling was by no means general or in equal degrees. And it so happened that this married couple felt completely at variance on the subject. Granting it to have been so, one would have thought that the laird, owing to his retiring situation, would have been the one that inclined to the stern doctrines of the reformers, and that the young and gay dame from the city would have adhered to the free principles cherished by the court party, and indulged in rather to extremity, in opposition to their severe and carping contemporaries. The contrary, however, happened to be the case. The laird was what his country neighbors called a droll, careless chap, with a very limited proportion of the fear of God in his heart, and very nearly as little of the fear of man.
Excellent.
The laird had not intentionally wronged or offended either of the parties, and perceived not the necessity of deprecating their vengeance. He had hitherto believed that he was living in most cordial terms with the greater part of the inhabitants of the earth, and with the powers above in particular. But woe be unto him if he was not soon convinced of the fallacy of such damning security. For his lady was the most severe and gloomy of all bigots to the principles of the Reformation. Hers were not the tenets of the great reformers, but theirs mightily overstrained and deformed. Theirs was an unguent hard to be swallowed, but hers was that unguent embittered and overheated until nature could no longer bear it. She had imbibed her ideas from the doctrines of one flaming predestinarian divine alone, and these were so rigid that they became a stumbling block to many of his brethren, and a mighty handle for the enemies of his party to turn the machine of the state against them. The wedding festivities at Castle partook of all the gaiety, not of that stern age, but of one previous to it. There was feasting, dancing, piping, and singing. The liquors were handed around in great fullness, the ale in large wooden bickers, and the brandy in capacious horns of oxen.
No, that's a butty.
The laird gave full scope to his homely glee. He danced, he snapped his fingers to the music, clapped his hands, and shouted at the turn of the tune. He saluted every girl in the hall whose appearance was anything tolerable, and requested of their sweethearts to take the same freedom with his bride, by way of retaliation. But there she sat at the head of the hall in still and blooming beauty, absolutely refusing to tread a single measure with any gentleman there. The only enjoyment in which she appeared to partake was in now and then stealing a word of a sweet conversation with her favorite pastor about divine things. For he had accompanied her home after marrying her to her husband to see her fairly settled in her new dwelling. He addressed her several times by her new name, Mrs. Colwayne, but she turned away her head disgusted and looked with pity and contempt towards the old, inadvertent sinner, capering away in the height of his unregenerated mirth. The minister perceived the workings of her pious mind, and thenceforward addressed her by the courteous title of Lady Castle, which sounded somewhat better, as not coupling her name with one of the wicked. And there is too great reason to believe that. For all the solemn vows she had come under, and these were of no ordinary binding, particularly on the laird's part, she at that time despised, if not abhorred him in her heart. The good parson again blessed her and went away. She took leave of him with tears in her eyes, entreating him often to visit her in that heathen land of the Amorite, the Hittite, and the Girgashite, to which he assented on many solemn and qualifying conditions. And then the comely bride retired to her chamber to pray. It was customary in those days for the bride's man and maiden and a few select friends to visit the new married couple after they had retired to rest, and drink a cup to their healths, their happiness, and a numerous posterity. But the laird delighted not in this. He wished to have his jewel to himself, and slipping away quietly from his jovial party, he retired to his chamber to his beloved, and bolted the door. He found her engaged with the writings of the evangelists, and terribly demure. The laird went up to caress her, but she turned away her head, and spoke of the follies of aged men, and something of the broad way that leadeth to destruction. The laird did not thoroughly comprehend this allusion, but being considerably flustered by drinking, and disposed to take all in good part, he only remarked, as he took off his shoes and stockings, that, whether the way was broad or narrow, it was time that they were in their bed. Sure, Mr. Colwayne, you won't go to bed tonight at such an important period of your life without first saying prayers for yourself and me. When she said this, the laird had his head down almost to the ground, loosing his shoe buckle. But when he heard of prayers on such a night, he raised his face suddenly up, which was all over as flushed, as red as a rose, and answered, "Prayers, mistress? Lord help your crazed head. Is this a night for prayers?" He had better have held his peace. There was such a torrent of profound divinity poured out upon him that the laird became ashamed, both of himself and his new-made spouse, and wist not what to say, but the brandy helped him out. It strikes me, my dear, that religious devotion would be somewhat out of place tonight, said he, allowing that it is ever so beautiful and ever so beneficial. Were we to ride on the rigging of it at all times, would we not be constantly making a farce of it? It would be like reading the Bible and the jest book, verse about, and would render the life of man a medley of absurdity and confusion. But against the cant of the bigot or the hypocrite, no reasoning can aught avail. If you would argue until the end of life, the infallible creature must alone be right. So it proved with the laird. One scripture text followed another, not in the least connected, and one sentence of the profound Mr. Ringham's sermons after another, proving the duty of family worship, till the laird lost patience, and tossing himself into bed, said carelessly that he would leave that duty upon her shoulders for one night. The meek mind of Lady Dalcastle was somewhat disarranged by the sudden evolution. She felt that she was left rather in an awkward situation. However, to show her unconscionable spouse that she was resolved to hold fast her integrity, she kneeled down and prayed in terms so potent that she deemed she was sure of making an impression on him. She did so, for in a short time the laird began to utter a response so fervent that she was utterly astounded, and fairly driven from the chain of her orisons. He began, in truth, to sound a nasal bugle of no ordinary caliber, the notes being little inferior to those of a military trumpet. The lady tried to proceed, but every returning note from the bed burst on her ear with a louder twang and a longer peal, till the concord of sweet sounds became so truly pathetic that the meek spirit of the dame was quite overcome, and after shedding a flood of tears, she arose from her knees and retired to the chimney corner with her Bible in her lap, there to spend the hours in holy meditation till such time as the inebriated trumpeter should awaken to a sense of propriety.
Right, enough of that.
The laird did not wake in any reasonable time.
Well, you get the idea. I think it's a great book, and it's maybe just appeals to my sense of humour, but it was certainly never intended to be a humorous book. I think, as I say, the date, I think it was around 1880. Something that maybe earlier. But I know it was slightly before, 20, 30 years before Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I think maybe Robert Louis Stevenson got some inspiration from this book, possibly. But it's worth a listen on LibriVox if you like that kind of stuff, and they've got thousands of free books that are out of copyright. So go check them out. Get a splash of the Henry Cooper. That's me done again. Bye now.